in a chilling and tragic case that spanned over a decade. The murder of 21-year-old Julie Buskin shocked Oklahoma City in December 1996. Julie, a dedicated ballet student with a promising future, was last seen on the night of December 19th, only to be found dead the next day, bound and shot execution style. Despite a thorough investigation and numerous leads, the case went cold for several years. It wasn't until a breakthrough in DNA technology and a series of compelling connections that authorities could finally link Anthony Castillo Sanchez to the heinous crime. This script delves into the harrowing details of Julie's murder. 21-year-old Julie Buskin, or Julie as she will be referred to, lived in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma in 1996. Julie was born and raised in Benton, Arkansas, and moved to Oklahoma to study at Oklahoma University. She worked at the university's golf course. Julie was on her way to earning her bachelor's degree in dance. She was an aspiring ballerina, and after college, Julie wanted to open up a studio and teach children to dance. Julie was described as popular and had many friends at school. She was also very talented. Julie spent the evening of December 19th of 1996 with her friend Ryan James at his grandparents' house. Ryan worked with Julie at the golf course. After dinner, they watched a movie. In addition, the two made plans to have lunch the next day. Julie stayed at his grandparents' house until 10 p.m., then left to hang out with some of her other friends. Julie and her friends played Monopoly and exchanged Christmas gifts at one of the friends' houses. Her semester at college had just ended. Her roommate Megan was also there. Julie promised Megan she would give her a ride to Will Rogers Airport the next morning at 5 o'clock a.m. Few while later, the two left the apartment again and headed towards the airport around 4:30 a.m. It took them 30 minutes to get there. Julie dropped Megan off and Megan watched Julie drive away from the airport in her Red Eagle Summit. Around 5:30 a.m. at the Dublin West Apartments where Julie lived, many of the residents heard a woman scream in terror. One of the residents made a 911 call to report what they had heard.
Norman 911.
Yes, we were just sleeping, and my wife heard a really strange, like a really awful scream from our parking lot of our apartment complex.
Do you see anything outside?
No, I'm kind of afraid to go outside, actually.
A few hours later, Ryan James turned up at Julie's apartment for their scheduled lunch date. Julie was nowhere to be found. However, her car was also missing. Ryan then reported her missing. Not long after that, Julie's parents arrived at her apartment. They drove from Arkansas to help Julie with her move back home. Instead of their daughter, they found policemen who informed them that Julie was missing 12 hours. Julie Buskin's body was found on the bank of a lake about 15 miles from her apartment. Her hands were tied behind her back with a pair of shoelaces, and from the waist up, she was in the water. At the lake, investigators found possible evidence in the sand near Julie's body. There were two sets of footprints that went down to the lake and only one that returned. One set belonged to Julie, and the other police believed belonged to the person who shot her. After examining, the footprint was consistent with a size 9 men's Nike running shoe, specifically a Nike Air 2 running shoe. About 20 feet from Julie's body, investigators found a crumpled pink leotard with the initials JB on the label. It was Julie's. The leotard had male DNA on it and was subsequently stored to be used later when DNA technology was more advanced. An autopsy confirmed Julie was shot with a single .22 caliber bullet. Julie Buskin had quite a lot of friends at the university, and investigators set out to interview as many of them as possible. They hoped someone could provide useful information. There was no one that openly disliked Julie. Police found Julie's apartment in perfect order. There were no signs of any struggle taking place. They found Julie's car in an apartment complex just 1 block away from where she lived. Red sand on the floor of the car looked similar to the red sand at the banks of the lake where Julie's body was found. This was seen as rather bizarre by investigators. Why would someone abduct Julie, take her life at the lake, and then drive her car back to almost the exact location? Frustratingly, there were no foreign hairs, fibers, or prints in the car. Julie's phone was missing. Investigators obtained her cell phone records to see if it could be useful. The cell phone records indicated that someone made 2 phone calls after she was not alive anymore. One of the calls was for the weather forecast and the other to a number not in service at the time. Then a month after Julie's life was ended, a man called the police. He said that on the night Julie was abducted, he saw a car like hers pull out in front of him and they almost collided. This was near the lake. This is the sketch they came up with of the young man that was driving Julie's car away from the lake. He was possibly a college student, possibly Hispanic with long black hair and a muscular build. The composite sketch was broadcast repeatedly by the local media in Oklahoma. No one recognized him. Police received a letter from a female inmate at the Oklahoma County Jail. She said an old acquaintance of hers might have taken Julie's life. He was 23-year-old Dennis Sturmer. Sturmer was a construction worker and had no criminal record. But at the time of the crime, he lived just 4 blocks away from Julie's apartment, and he bore a resemblance to the composite sketch. Sturmer refused to provide his DNA sample. Police had to get a court order to collect his DNA. His DNA profile was very, very close to the sample. Again, the case went cold. Sadly, Julie's parents had to accept the possibility that they might not live long enough to see justice take place. Investigators were determined for that not to happen, and they essentially attempted to collect DNA from every male Julie ever came into contact with. Over 200 men were tested, but no one matched. It seemed like the case might never get solved. 6 years after Julie's life was taken, a man by the name of Anthony Castillo Sanchez was arrested for assaulting his girlfriend. After the arrest, Sanchez had to give a DNA sample to law enforcement for testing. Investigators noticed some interesting facts about Sanchez's background. He lived just 1 mile away from Julie's apartment. One of Sanchez's girlfriends showed investigators her diary for the month in which Julie's life was ended. Interestingly, one of Anthony's exes had a cell phone number that was just 1 digit off of the number that was dialed on Julie's phone after she was not alive anymore. It was possible that Sanchez tried to call the ex's number from memory, but got 1 digit wrong. Sanchez and his father had an unusual habit of firing .22 caliber guns at the wall inside the house they rented. Investigators collected a bullet from the house. It was determined that the bullet came from the same gun as the one used to shoot Julie. Only 6 companies made .22 caliber guns with the specific grooves found on the bullets. Finally, in 2004, Anthony Sanchez's DNA was compared to the male DNA found on Julie's leotard. It was, of course, a match. Sanchez was only 18 years old at the time of the crime. Anthony Castillo Sanchez was convicted in 2006. It was decided that he was going to pay for the crime with his life. The resolution of Julie Buskin's case, marked by the conviction of Anthony Castillo Sanchez, brings a semblance of closure to a heart-wrenching tragedy that spanned over a decade. Despite the extensive efforts of law enforcement and advances in forensic science, the echoes of Julie's untimely death serve as a stark reminder of the impact of such brutal acts on families and communities. As Sanchez faces execution, the case underscores the enduring quest for justice and the relentless pursuit of truth, offering a measure of solace to those who have waited so long for answers.